Disclaimer. To the Pharisees and Karens out there.
How dare you!
All guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want!
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion is advised.
You talk about extreme.
If knowledge is a crime, we were guilty from the start. They don't fear the questions, they fear the spark. So we steal the fire, not to rule, not to reign, just to see through smoke and mirrors. And they call it dangerous thinking, they call it heresy. But fire doesn't fear the dark, it only shows what's real.
Hey you guys, what is happening and what is up? Hold out that glass, baby, because you know what time it is. We about to fill it up. Welcome to Prometheus Lens Podcast, the place where the conversations are always enlightening. I'm your host, Doc Brown, and here we like to use the allegory of the Prometheus Lens to take a second look at everything. Hey guys, if you're new to the channel, welcome to the hero's journey. Be sure and smash that like button and slap that subscribe button while you're here, man. Check out this banner down below with all of our social medias at our various platforms, and that would be much appreciated. Man, I got my brother from another mother. We are back for part 2, a continuation of a really enthralling conversation that we had about plasma portals, and we kind of got into the UFO disclosure and the phenomenons and how all this is tied to all kinds of natural phenomenon, whether we realize it or not. It's tied into solar flares and space weather. It's even down to some of the stones and the material inside of the mountains and the ley lines. There's just, like anything, guys, there's always this multi-faceted layers of things. It's not just this or that. It's usually a combination of things, and this brother looks at it from all angles, man. So I'm really pleased to have you back on the show. But hey, man, enough with all the flattery and fluff. Let's welcome back to the show Brad Lail from the Awakened Podcast. Brad, thank you so much for coming back, brother.
Hey man, that was great, dude. I wish I could do intros the way some people can do intros. I gotta pre-record them or record them afterwards because my intros are so terrible. I fumble, I get nervous, and I'm just not good as a public speaking as you are, I guess, yet. But I'll get there, man, with a little bit of practice. But thank you for having me back home, brother. I appreciate it.
No, man, it's like my old man used to always say, man, with enough time and repetition, you can teach a monkey to do anything. And I'm kind of like a Lucius Everett McGill from Brother Where Art Thou. You know, he flips him suspenders. He's like, I was born with the gift of gab.
Some people just have that natural charisma, dude. I don't have it, so.
No, brother, you got it, man. You're a natural born researcher. You're one of those big brain guys.
Well, you know, I got a background in journalism, really, and I didn't have any experience. I grew up in a trailer park, and then I moved out I graduated to a double-wide trailer down a dirt road, man. And so, like, whenever I got out of high school, my only prospects were join the military or go work construction. And first, right off the bat, I worked construction, and I painted cars and stuff like that. And then, so I literally had like a blue-collar background. And then when I joined the Air Force, I followed my brother's footsteps and joined the Air Force in 2003. They gave me the job of photographer. And I was like, what a weird, I didn't even know this was possible. I never pushed a button in my life to take a picture except for like a wind-up camera. And so photography is under the public relations umbrella, and public relations, public affairs, that's journalism pretty much. You know, it's kind of a all-encompassing umbrella in the military, at least, because they cover, you know, every base has its own newspaper, you know, we're also trying to tell our own story in the military. So we're literally creating our own articles that go in USA Today, and we're creating photographs and stuff like that. And we're submitting them to, you know, this big platform that all these big media conglomerates can pull from. So I was part of drafting my own story and drafting my own narrative. And a lot of times I had the freedom to go out with my camera, and because it would be like, just go make something happen. And so I'd get in the Humvee or a truck or whatever, and I would just drive around base, or I'd drive off base or whatever, and I would just go follow this group around or that group around. and I would wait for the story to unfold. Like I remember one time I was in Iraq in 2007, and I always had my camera on me, and I was going back to my hooch, and as I was doing that, I saw a helicopter landing on the near the med pad, and there was a rainbow overhead of it, and I was just happened to be there with my camera at the moment. This rainbow is covering the helicopter as it's coming down, and it was a wounded troop that they were bringing to the hospital there on base. And so it was just a really cool photograph that I got, but it was an experience that always be ready and always be willing to form or conform to whatever's happening and, make something happen, find the story in something. I would go out and I would find, I would talk to the security guys who would be on the perimeters all night, and I would get their stories. And so I found it to be a really fulfilling job in the military. Despite having a blue collar background, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. I like finding stories. I like looking through my lens at a through a different lens for a different perspective on something. And so while everybody else is swimming this way, I'm swimming the other way, trying to find the story. What's going on? What's the rub of everything? So naturally, I guess by trade, this is what I was born to do. It's the position that God put me in whenever I was in the military, and I feel like He put me in this position now. So yeah, pretty cool little pathway that I've taken. And it seems very counterintuitive to what I was how I was raised. A redneck, drinking and smoking and fighting and doing all these things, and then now I'm wearing glasses and, looking at computers all day and stuff like that. It's a very different lifestyle, dude.
Yeah. And pretty much the same with me, 9-to-5 knuckle dragger, and stumbled behind a microphone and figured out how to turn the camera on, man. But it speaks to your testimony, man. It speaks, I think, to your divine purpose. I mean, how else can you explain someone with your background and your pedigree to be where you are if it's not where, God has pushed you to be and where you're supposed to be? Because it defies all logic.
Yeah, and we were kind of talking about that a little bit before the show. I mean, there's some things that happen in my life that don't make any sense, Like I'll get down the path of learning or discovering something or investigating or researching something, and I always find these little nuggets. And I feel like these little nuggets are nods to me to like, hey, you're doing the right thing. You're on the right path. We were talking about it before the show, synchronicity. You feel like it's the Holy Spirit telling you you're on the right path. But these synchronicities are weird because it's like family names and it's birthdays and it's like places I grew up and places I've been to and all kind of stuff. And so I keep finding these things along the way. And that's why I reached out to you the other night, because I was investigating the Michigan swamp gas case from 1966. And as I was investigating it, one of the things that stood out to me was this guy named Mendel Rivers, who was a 30-year congressman from South Carolina, who served as the House Armed Services chairman for a long time. And he was one of the first to ever bring forth to Congress one of the UFO disclosure hearings. And he had J. Allen Hynek come in to give the briefing on the 1966 swamp gas case and all this, because it was basically Gerald Ford was a congressman at the time, and he was a congressman in Michigan, and he was very unhappy with the reporting that J. Allen Hynek did from this, because there was like hundreds of people who witnessed these different things in the sky hovering over swamps, all kind of, it was spanned like 50 miles, 100 miles in this one little region in Ann Arbor and Dexter, Michigan. And at the time, like I said, Gerald Ford, who later became the president, obviously, was very unhappy with J. Allen Hynek, because everybody who was involved, all these witnesses were basically saying like J. Allen Hynek he was kind of flippant about like the reporting. He was kind of like, he didn't really believe what people were saying. And he was just kind of writing it off. And so J. Allen Hynek goes on, he gives his briefing. He's like, swamp gas. And everybody was kind of like, man, that's BS. So it spurned this whole train of thought. And it actually stuck with, I guess, ufologists for a long time. I mean, this is one of the most famous stories because it shows that the military, the government, doesn't really care about people reporting these things. They always try to write it off as something else. But actually, when you get into the case, you start to see maybe J. Allen Hyde was telling us something here with this swamp gas stuff. But anyways, I was talking about mineral rivers, right? So mineral rivers, one of these little nuggets. I'm looking into all this stuff, and mineral rivers is the road that I grew up on. It's a dirt road in South Carolina. It's off the main road called Mineral Rivers Road. Okay. And so Mineral Rivers and I are literally from the same community of about 100 people. And so I grew up in the same it used to be called Gumville, South Carolina, but now it's called St. Stephen, South Carolina. And so it's a weird little tie-in because, I've known Mineral Rivers my whole life. Everybody's like, that's where Mineral Rivers grew up. His whole family's from there. And we all know each other. It's like little clans, little tribes pretty much. And so to see his name tied into a story like that is like, man, like that's really weird and really cool, because I didn't really pay attention before about who Mineral Rivers was. And he grew up on the 33rd parallel, literally right beside me, like I said. And he lives in a region of South Carolina. This road that we grew up of is a lot of springs, a lot of swamps and things like that. And so my mom actually was driving through this right in front of his house one day, and she had this like not missing time. What do you call it? It was like I forgot the name of it, but she drove through this like area, and then I was on the phone with her, and she was like, "What the hell?" It was like, yeah, she drove through this area, and then she drove through it again. It was like a glitch in the Matrix or something. She kind of went through this portal and ended up back in the same road again, if that makes any sense. And that was right in front of his house. So there's always these weird little tie-ins. Like I said, dude, I mean, how small of a world is it where the guy who led the first UFO disclosure hearing in the United States, and one of the biggest ones, it actually was what dissolved Project Blue Book, was that briefing, was that hearing, because everybody was in uproar. They were like, basically, there was all these scientists and stuff saying that there was no proof of any of this stuff. And so basically Project Blue Book lost all of its money. So just weird little tie-ins, man. And there was another one with the Travis Walton case that I'll get to in a minute. But yeah, man, it's really interesting. Once you get down these paths, you start discovering like, maybe this was my purpose the whole time, to go out and, find, investigate these things. And it's so weird because it feels like it's some kind of a reality, some kind of a scripted reality that you just join, and there's like, okay, here's your quest. It's like a Dungeons and Dragons quest or something, like a World of Warcraft quest. And it's like, okay, Brad, you're going to be Brad, and you're going to go on this UFO journey, and you're going to find all these little nuggets that are nods to you and your family and your names. And dude, it's really weird, man. I was looking into the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and all these names in the Gulf of Tonkin was like birthdays in my family, like literal actual days that my family were born on, and names of my family members and stuff like that. So it's always these weird little nods, these weird little synchronicities that got me down this path. And it's pretty interesting. It's pretty fun to be on, because it's like, I get my mind's blown every time I do this stuff, dude. And I always want to share it with somebody. So like I said, that's why I reached out to you, man.
It's like a treasure hunt. What's next? Well, with that story you talked about, that's something I'm not familiar with, because like I said, when I come into this space, I was a baby conspiracy theorist. You know what I mean? I had the 30,000 foot view of Bigfoot. I had the 30,000 foot view of UFOs. I knew of the Travis Walton incident just because of HBO, that movie, Ring of Fire, that came out. And I remember it scarred me as a kid watching him get abducted and him getting probed and all that stuff. So this swamp gas, I'm not familiar with exactly. So I'm assuming they say like basically it was like a mass hallucination, like this gas maybe caused people to see things that was not there, or
no, that's not what it is. It actually ties into my plasma portals theory. You and I have talked about this at great length, how I think plasma can become complex plasma that's driven by noble gases, and these so the gas would be like the gasoline. The noble gas would be like the gas you put in a car. It kind of drives this complex plasma around. The plasma is intelligent because it has a silicon center in it, and the silicon center has a plasma body around it, and this makes it a complex plasma. So that silicon is like a memory chip. It's like an analog memory chip, and the plasma itself is like this coherent, this structure that wants to cohere and grow, and it wants to form. It's like how when you cut a worm in half and it tries to try to get back together. That kind of is what it does, but light always disperses it back into its original form of a soup of ions and electrons and things like that. So anyways, the plasma becomes complex plasma. The complex plasma has to hit a magnetic field in order to come into this reality. And whenever it comes into this reality, it emerges as an orb or a ball lightning or whatever you want to call it, these UAPs. And so what happened in with the swamp gas stuff, so with let me get back to this. So when it becomes orb, it's flying around and it pulls from the putrefied ions of dead animals, metamaterials, and things like that. And this is how it forms into Bigfoot and aliens and things like that. So this is why Yeti is white, because it's pulling from the putrefied remains of like dead snow animals, for example. But Bigfoot smells and looks all like all these different kinds of creatures because it's pulling from swamp creatures, right? It's pulling from, smelly foxes and, beavers and all these other things that are living in around swamp deer and all this other stuff, which my brother had an incident in the national forest with some of these weird creatures before. And so like they're literally like skinwalkers in that way, where just imagine a giant magnetic ball flying around and just pulling all these things in and it's making something, right? And it forms into something. Mm. So that's kind of what J. Allen Hynek is saying in a way, but I'll get to that in a minute. So what happened in 1966? So March 1966, southeastern Michigan experienced one of the most famous UFO flaps in U.S. history, where it was a mass sighting essentially. And these spreadings were all across these different counties. There was a place called Washtenaw County and Hillsdale County and a couple other places. And it got a lot of national attention. And so the Air Force sent out this guy named J. Allen Hynek. He was an astronomer. He was also a professor. He was working for Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book, by the way, had many names over the course of 20 years. Its final name was sort of Project Blue Book, and who knows if it still exists. I'm sure it still does, and under a different name. And the case became known as the swamp gas case.
It's called Government Alien Disclosure.
Yeah. Well, they had so many different, they were having, back then they had a lot of different names for these organizations, which you'd be surprised about. Even in the 40s and 50s, they had names like anomalous plasma and stuff like that. Some of these, so some of these things are real. They just have changed the names to soften the appearance of it. I mean, there's guys like Donald Kehoe who wrote about, he was writing pulp fiction novels in the 20s called Weird Tales about some of this stuff. And so
they were talking about ether in the school books back in the day. I remember Dr. Greg Little, he was the guy you referenced earlier, talking about some of the plasmas in a previous episode. And he said, in the textbooks when I was a kid, he said they talked about the ether and the ionosphere, all this other kind of things. He said, but it was too woo-woo or spiritual for them, so they had to rename it and make it look more sciencey,
Yeah, that's what it is. And it's more science stuff now. And they write it off as... especially when you get guys like J. Allen Hynek. Remember, he's an astronomer. He's a physicist. He's into science, right? So he's going to take the science explanation of things, and naturally, by his job, I'm sure at some point he learned that these things are what we're calling anomalous plasma, or just plasma. These Jersey drones and stuff like that. I'm sure he was very well aware of this back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and so. I don't think that when you read his report, you get the sense that he doesn't really know what it is, but he's on that path of kind of what I've been talking about. Because he talks about decaying vegetation and things like that in this report that causes, and what I just say about decaying life form, right? This is what these plasmas
energy
are
leach.
pulling from. Yeah, they're so when he's saying that this decaying vegetation basically causes like lights that are kind of flying around and stuff like that. And this happens a lot in swamps, which is true, which is very true. But he doesn't make the connection for the plasma and stuff like that. And that's why when people back in the 50s and 60s and stuff like in 1966, they're hearing this report and they're thinking they want to see green men with Martian helmets and all this other stuff. They want to hear those kinds of answers from people, and they're not getting it. Instead, they're getting like a scientist's point of view on like what it is.
Most days don't look like an emergency. That's why most people never think about what they're carrying. We do. Because preparedness isn't about looking the part. It's about being ready anyway. Comfort isn't a luxury. It's what keeps you moving when the day goes longer than planned. That's why every Squatch survival pack is made here, start to finish. Squatch builds packs for people who don't assume the day will stay easy. Rougarou, Mothman, built to last your missions and be passed down when you're done. Squatch survival gear, ready for the next one.
And so, like, naturally, everybody's going, this is BS. This is not swamp gas. And so, like, how do you handle that? And but it's interesting. But I'll kind of get into the story a little bit before I go on with that. So these sightings happened between March 14th and March 18th, 1966, and the wave with these of strange lights that were happening. There were police officers seeing them. There were civilians seeing them, and they were describing these bright objects that were hovering. They were red. They were white. They were blue. They had sudden rapid movement. They would accelerate to the sky. They would drop back down. They were silent flight. They definitely had shapes. And this is what they were reporting. Again, we had college students. We had farmers reporting this. We had police officers who were called by these farmers. There was a guy named Dexter. There's a guy named Frank Manor. And he was from a place called Dexter, Michigan. And he had a farm, and him and his son had seen these things hovering over the swamp. They called the cops. The cops came out, and they're looking at all. They're literally seeing these things for themselves. So eventually, the whole neighborhood starts coming over. 2 hours worth of these things flying around the sky. So we're talking literally hundreds and even possibly thousands of people who saw these things, and maybe some people didn't even report them because it was so taboo, right? I mean, if you
this was Michigan, right?
Yeah, this is Michigan. But you got to
think it didn't happen down south. They'd been gathered around with their rifles and shotguns shooting at it.
Yeah, but in the South, we're kind of pride ourselves on being Southern, and we live off the land and stuff. A lot of people, there's more rural areas in this whole country. We have a lot more in common with people in New Jersey farms than we do with someone in Atlantic City, New Jersey, for example. Those are two different worlds. I used to date a girl, I was engaged to a girl out of New Jersey, and I would go up there and I was surprised. There was guys with big jacked up mud grip tire trucks and mud, there was mud all over it and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, these are my people. I didn't realize Jersey had these kind of people. But so there's like that in Michigan at the time as well.
Country is countrywide, man.
Country. Yeah, that's exactly right. In Wyoming, you're going to see the same kind of people. So, but like I said, everybody started gathering around, and all of them reported it as well. And a little bit down the road, about 50 miles away, there was a place called Hillsdale College, and about 50 to 80 different people saw it, including these two girls I can't remember their names. It was like a famous, they saw it up close and personal, and there was a documentary done on them. So they were describing the same thing. Bright objects hovering over these swampy areas, and they were hovering over the ground, accelerating up high and low and moving all over the place and stuff like that. So they didn't just look like orbs of light that were just kind of floating around. Because the way J. Allen Hynek describes it is he describes, just like, they come out, they are emitted, these lights are emitted, and they're just kind of floating around, non-intelligently or whatever. But all these witnesses were saying, again, police and everybody, all these credible people were saying, no, we saw these things. It was a craft. It was like this big, there's drawings of it online. There were these metal crafts and everything that came out of it. And they were hovering over swamps, and they weren't there before, and they became metallic objects. They went from orbs to metallic objects somehow. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying. I think that these complex plasmas, when they hit that magnetic field and become an orb, I think they are highly electromagnetically charged, and they can like pull from metals that are just kind of like these micro metals that may be flying around in the sky, maybe aluminum and barium or whatever, that they can just kind of pull from, which is funny because barium and aluminum, Ba and Al, is ball, right? So,
hey guys and gals, I hope you enjoyed that. But here, I gotta stop you because only the cool kids can go from here. This is an all-access pass exclusive. And if you are not a member, hey man, it's easy. I got links down in the description. Head on over to the website PrometheusLensPodcast.com and sign up for the All Access Pass. And join a group of like-minded people like yourself that have started this hero's journey. They enjoy 48-hour early access to all episodes, members-only exclusive episodes, and an ad-free listening experience on Apple and Spotify. Torch is high, guys.
So we steal the fire, not to burn.